I think my favorite book was Not to My Yo-Yo String because it talks a lot about how he felt growing up in Norriton, and I get that because I've grown up in Norriton and I'm living in Norriton. So he said that he was in an emotional phase when he wrote Maniac McGee, and I think that was pretty awesome because it seems as though he was in an emotional phase when he wrote the book, and it was very nice, and I like it a lot.
The most interesting thing he said was like that he didn't give up writing a book, even though he couldn't find an ending, he still found a way to get around it, and I like this.
I had a couple favorite places. Three of them happened, and three of them happened on Saturdays. My typical Saturday, I would go down to downtown. I would walk maybe a mile and a half or two from my house in the West End, and I would go to the Y. There's not even a Y there anymore, is there? This is around. It was near the prison. This was about DeKalb and Erie Street, where the YMCA was. Yeah. And I would play ping pong with my friends at the Y there, and sometimes we would watch a Tarzan movie. And then I would go to my second favorite place for lunch, which was Texas Hot Wieners, which was on Main Street, pretty near the Norris movie theater. And I would get a hot dog with their special meat sauce and onions, and a half-pint carton of chocolate milk. Then I would go to my third favorite place, which was across the street from Texas Hot Wieners, which was the Grand Movie Theater. There was a movie theater there, and I would watch, no, it wasn't the Grand, it was the Garage. And I would watch double features. You could see two movies for one then on a Saturday afternoon if you were a kid. And often as not, it was a couple of cowboy movies. So they were my three favorite places in Norriton. I might as well, I'll call it that.
Okay, go ahead.
And I was well over that emotional phase. But you know, that's what you do. That's really a good question, because what a writer does is tap back into your history and tap back into the way you felt. And so as I was writing, I was kind of re-feeling some of that stuff when I was Maniac's age. So in a sense, the answer to your question is yes. Yes.
What type of books do you enjoy reading now?
Reading now? Oh, all kinds, really. At the moment, I'm reading the history of railroad dining cars and a murder mystery. Typically, I like to read murder mysteries for... I usually don't read in my own field. But for fun, that's what I like to do. Yeah. Yes. Joey's.
Where did you get the idea to do your first book, the first published book by kids' point of view?
Yeah. Why did I write my first published book, if you don't know, is I don't see it here. Space Station, 7th grade. Anybody have it? That was my first published book. I say my first published book because it was actually the 5th book that I wrote. But the first 4 nobody wanted. So Space Station, 7th grade was my 5th written book, but my first published book. And this happened, we were living in Havertown. You know where Havertown is?
I do.
Yes, it's about 15 miles from here. I'm up in, I came down to the kitchen early one morning to go to work. And I went to the refrigerator to get my lunch to take to work. I had left a brown paper bag with fried chicken in it in the refrigerator, and that was going to be my lunch for this day. So I reach in the refrigerator to get my lunch, open the bag, look in, and something's wrong. There's chicken bones in the bag, but no meat on them. It seems that somebody has eaten the meat off my fried chicken bones, put the bones back in the bag, and put the bag back in the refrigerator. Who would do such a dastardly thing? Well, I had 6 sleeping angels upstairs. I knew one of them had stolen my fried chicken. I knew nobody would confess. You guys don't confess, do you? Very rarely.
Yes.
Yeah. So I knew nobody would confess, so I went to work that day, fried chickens. And when lunchtime came, I closed my office door, and because it was still on my mind, I guess, I figured, well, I'll start to write about something about the fried chicken business. And I was about, this gets around to answering your question, I was about to sit down and write in the most natural way of all, which is to say my own point of view, right? I did this, I did that. But then I thought, wait a minute. If I'm going to tell the story of the fried chicken, there's a more interesting point of view here than mine. The point of view of the kid that ate my fried chicken. The criminal. And that's when my life changed. I didn't know this until years later, thinking back on it. But in that instant, when I said, wait a minute, there's a more interesting point of view, the point of view of the kid. Bam. The light went on and I started to write. One by one, my father put the chicken bones on the kitchen table. He laid them down real neat in a row, 5 of them. 2 wing bones, 2 thigh bones, 1 breastbone, and bones is all they were.
Chris Pacello, please report to the main office. Chris Pacello.
Bones is all they were. There wasn't a speck of meat on them. Was this really happening to me? Did my father really drag me out of bed at 7 o'clock on my summer vacation and drag me down to the kitchen in my underwear to stand in front of a row of chicken bones? If you read Space Station 7th grade, you'll see that that's the first page of the book, and those are the words that I wrote in my office that lunchtime from the point of view of the kid. And that's how it happened. Yes?
What is the latest book you have written, and what is it about?
The latest one I have actually written is called Hokey Pokey. And it's kind of like a sort of fantasy in a way about growing up. It's sort of a fable or a parable about growing up. And as a matter of fact, it's in Norriton. Though I don't know if many people will recognize it, except people that know Norriton. But that's not published yet. The most recently published book is a picture book called I Can Be Anything. And some people are buying it not just for little kids for picture books, but even high school graduates, because that's kind of the theme. That's what it's about. I can be anything. The last novel that came out, I guess, was Smiles to Go. Smiles to Go. Okay? Yes? Am I working on one? Yes, I am. I have about 226 pages at the moment of my next book, which is about brother and sister twins. And it's going to be called Jake and Lily. So I'm almost finished with that one. That's what I'm doing at the moment. Yes?
What inspired you to write Milkweed?
What inspired me to write Milkweed? Well, when I was growing up in Norriton, I remember sitting on my living room floor. My father had a lot of history books, and I would look through the books and look at pictures about the Second World War and the concentration camps and what we now call the Holocaust. And it just all made quite an impression on me. And so I decided one day that I would write a book about that, because it's something that I cared about, even though I wasn't personally involved. And so that's where that came from. Yes?
What inspired you to write
Crash? There was no particular, what you would say, inspiration for it. I'll say this: I've always, for many years, went to the Penn Relays, the famous track meet in Philadelphia that just happened a couple of weeks ago. And I always wanted to find an excuse to use the Penn Relays in a story of mine. So that's why you find the Penn Relays toward the end of Crash there. Beyond that, I just thought it would be interesting if to write a story about bullies, but from the bully's point of view, and to see what would happen. See if I could, rehabilitate such a kid. Yes.
Do you remember the poem that you wrote at age 16 for the local newspaper about your high school football team winning the big games? Could you tell us?
Yeah. That was that poem. I think the whole thing appears in here. Does that ring a bell with anybody? Yes, there it is. That was. We had a big game. Norristown High School was playing Lower Merion, and that year Lower Merion was one of the top 25 high school football teams in the country. They had won 32 straight games. They were undefeated for 3 years. And we were playing them where Norristown High School still plays the football games at Roosevelt Field on a Friday night in October. Norristown against Lower Merion, and we were winning 7-6. When one of their players got loose and made it all the way down to the 1-yard line before we stopped them. So, in other words, they had a first down and goal to go on the 1. That means they had 4 chances to make 36 inches, 1 yard. Impossible to stop, right? I mean, that's automatic. 1, 2, 3, 4 times they ran into the line. 4 times we stopped them. They couldn't even make 36 inches on us. One of the top 25 teams in the country. We won the game 7-6. Norristown went crazy. You could hear yelling, screaming, blaring horns, kicking cans. What did I do? I went home and wrote a poem. Wrote it out longhand about that goal line stand, which was magical. When I finished it, just wrote it longhand, gave it to my father, showed it to him, forgot about it. A couple days later, again, the Times Herald comes into play. I open the Norristown Times Herald, there's a sports page, and there's my poem in the middle of the sports page. What I didn't know was that my father had taken my poem down to Red McCarthy, the sports editor at the Norristown Times Herald, showed it to him, and he must have liked it, and he printed it in the paper the next day. I go to school next day, and everybody's patting me on the back. Way to go, man. Players, teachers, coaches, students. And I'm thinking, this is cool. Maybe I'll become a writer. So at that point, I kind of traded in my baseball bat for a pencil. And by the time I went off to college, I knew I wanted to be a writer. And it kind of all started with that poem that appeared in the Norristown Times Herald about the goal line stand. Yeah.
Do the boys you wrote about represent anybody in the family?
The boys I write about represent anybody in the family. And, well, little bits and pieces here and there. There's a pesky little brother, as I recall, in Who Put That Hair in My Toothbrush. And I think I might have had our son Ben in mind. He was a pain in the neck. Actually, the brother and the sister in Who Put That Hair in My Toothbrush. I figured I'd write a book about sibling warfare. I was inspired, speaking of inspiration, by two of those sleeping angels that were sleeping upstairs that time when somebody stole my fried chicken. And two of those sleeping angels were Molly and Jeffrey. Molly and Jeffrey hated each other. Anybody here have a brother or sister that they have a problem with? Yeah. Yeah, this is a common situation. I mean, like, you know, if they wanted to, if I had locked them both together in a closet and gone back 5 minutes later, I would have found them both dead. So I decided I would write a book about sibling warfare. And so Molly became Megamouth, or Megan. Jeffrey became Greg, or El Grosso. And the story of their warfare became Who Put That Hair in My Toothbrush. So there's a couple examples of kids making their way into my book. Yes?
Would you want one of your books to be a movie, and if so, which one?
Would I want them to? Well, yeah, I'd like them to be good movies, but you don't always have much control over that. Maniac McGee became a movie, but it stunk. Maniac McGee became a movie about 10 years ago. It was a Nickelodeon film. And frankly, I didn't like it. They cut some great parts out of it and some of the best parts out of it. And they dumbed it down, you know. I wrote a book about 10-year-olds. They made a movie for 10-year-olds. You know what I'm saying? Might as well have made a Mickey Mouse cartoon. So we'll see if there's any better luck with Stargirl. We've had a deal with everybody from Spielberg to Paramount to do Stargirl for the last 10 years. 2 months ago, Taylor Swift wanted to play Stargirl. This month, who knows? One thing I found out about Hollywood, you don't believe anything they say. So someday there'll be a Stargirl movie. We'll see. We also have film deals for Milkweed and Ringer. And there's another one too. I'm forgetting. But yeah, there's deals in the works. Yes.
Is the character Maniac McGee based on somebody you know?
Maniac McGee based on anybody I know. Maniac is the whole story is mainly a lot of patches stitched together. There are a couple An old friend of mine was an orphan. I like to say his mother was a basket and his father was a blanket. He was literally discovered on the steps of a convent in Philadelphia in a basket. To this day, he's 75 years old and he has no idea who his mother and father were. He was brought up in an orphanage outside Philadelphia. And I remember him telling me that he was one of these hyperactive kids, itchy, you know. Today we would take away his sugar. But they didn't know what to do with a hyperactive kid in those days, except the teacher would say when she began to see Carl getting a little itchy in his seat, she would say, "Okay, Carl, take a lap." And Carl would get up out of the seat in the classroom and trot around the edges of the class while the rest of the kids are doing their arithmetic. That would work off his energy and calm him down. If you saw him out on the campus of the orphanage, you never saw him walking. He ran everywhere he went. When he was old enough to leave the campus and go to the movies in town on a Saturday afternoon, he would run 6 miles to the nearest movie theater and 6 miles back. He ran everywhere he went. I remember him telling me this, and it just appealed to me, the idea of a kid who runs everywhere he goes. Maybe it appealed to me because now kids want to start driving at the age of 3, you know, and they want to ride everywhere. So I thought there was an old-fashioned appeal about a kid that runs everywhere he goes. And so when I, a couple of years later, began to think about this book and this character that I had in mind called Maniac McGee, I figured this is something good for him. So he became a kid who runs everywhere he goes. That's an example of something that worked its way into that particular story. Yes.
What intrigued you to write your book Stargirl and the sequel Love Stargirl?
Stargirl and Love Stargirl. Back in 1966, I had an idea to write a book about a kid, a boy who lives underground. Maybe in a sewer or a subway. He's kind of homeless. He lives by himself underground. And somehow, in the next 34 years, that idea percolated inside my head and came out 34 years later as the book that you know as Stargirl. A boy became a girl, the story became different, and it became the story of this kid that names herself Stargirl. As far as the kind of character she is, probably inspired more than anybody else by the person I live with. Eileen Spinelli invented the happy wagon when she was your age. She had a happy wagon on her dresser, and if it was a good day, she would put a pebble in, and if it was a bad day, she would take a pebble out. So she could know at a glance, seeing how full her happy wagon was every day, just how well things were going that week. And a lot of things in the story of Stargirl, she to this day, if you meet her and you're talking and you happen to say that you're a big fan of pecan pie, she will go home and she will make a note. What's your name? What's your first name?
Natalie.
She will make a note. Natalie, pecan pie. And if you come to our house 10 years from now, you will find yourself served with a piece of pecan pie probably, because she will have looked you up and seen that, oh, Natalie, pecan pie. And as you know, if you've read Stargirl, that's the sort of thing she does. So, there's your answer. Yes?
Why did you choose to use Norriton as a setting for a lot of your writing?
Why did I choose Norristown as a setting? Simply because that's where I grew up. That's where I know. And that's what, if you're smart, a writer does, is you write about what you know, what you're familiar with. You might disguise it, but you know, it works for me by using my own personal history as a starting point for my story. And you'll find a lot of writers do that. Yes?
Are the characters in your book actually people that you knew in your life?
The characters in my books, people that I knew in my life, in some cases there's a little resemblance, as I mentioned with my wife, some resemblance to Stargirl. But mostly no, in the sense that you can't pick out a character in my book and say, oh, that's my old friend Joe Stackhouse, you know. My characters are, for the most part, made up bits and pieces of a lot of different memories and so forth. Yes?
Did you ever start writing a book and you didn't know how to end it, so you had to give up?
Yeah, that can happen. You know, beginnings are a dime a dozen. I could easily start books. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I could toss off 20 beginnings right now. You know, the first paragraph. But 30,000 words later, you know, you might be getting bogged down. That happens very commonly. So sometimes it's easier to begin a book than to end it. But no, I don't think I've ever actually given up and thrown something away because I haven't been able to think of an ending. If you're that far into a book, you know, you'll find a way to finish it. Just give me hands of people who haven't asked a question yet, so I don't keep getting the same people. I want to give you all at least one chance, okay? Yeah. Ringer. Anybody read Ringer? I used to read in the Philadelphia Inquirer about an event that took place every Labor Day in a small town north of Harrisburg in Pennsylvania. And it was a pigeon shoot, an occasion where people were invited to come and stand by a soccer field, and somebody would pull the hatch on the little white box and release a couple of pigeons who would wobble out onto the field, and then the guy who had just paid his $10 would stand there with his shotgun and fire away at the pigeons. The idea was to make money for the local park system. And it got a lot of attention from animal rights people and so forth until after a while it became such a circus with the TV there and people arguing back and forth about animals' rights and all. It just seemed to me that it was a natural story there somewhere. And I finally figured out how to get into the story when I read about one of the features of this event, and that is that they had these kids that they called trappers or trapper boys or ringers. And the job of the ringer was to go around and collect the shot pigeons and dump them in trash bags, get them out of the way. And some of them were only wounded. They weren't dead yet. So the idea was to wring their necks and then throw them into the trash bag. And that's why these boys were called ringers. And so it occurred to me to ask this question: what would happen in a town that shoots pigeons like this, where boys, when they reach the age of 10 or so, are expected to become ringers? What would happen if you had a kid who did not want to become a ringer in such a town? And you might say the book is the answer to that question. Yes?
What inspired you to write Report to the Principal's Office?
Report to the Principal's Office was actually Well, the series actually began as a request from Scholastic Publishing. They asked me if I would, they gave me several ideas for series. And one of them was called School Days. And I decided I would do that one. And so I wound up doing 4 School Days books with Sonny and Pickles and who else? Eddie. 4 kids. And those 4 books, the first of those 4 books was Report to the Principal's Office. Followed by Who Ran My Underwear Up the Flagpole, the title of which I got from a kid in the school. And Do the Funky Pickle and Pickle Mania. So those are the 4 books in that series. Yes?
Where, I've heard you travel a lot. Where is your favorite destination to travel?
Favorite destination to travel? Probably where we spend our summers, and that's up in Chautauqua, New York. It's an amazing place up there. It's very kid-friendly. You guys would like it. And they have a lot of things going on up there all summer. And we spend our summers up there. I also like Cape May. I like Ocean City. I like Lancaster County. I like Venice. I like London. Okay, one more. Yes.
Most of your books are realistic fiction. Did you ever consider writing like a different genre, like horror? Did you consider it?
Did I ever consider writing what?
A horror book?
A horror book? Yeah, I even more than that, I've always wanted to do a science fiction book. And I kind of scratched that itch when I did the one I mentioned at first, Hokey Pokey, that hasn't been published yet. That's a little bit like that. Horror itself, I've written a horror story that appeared in a book just this past year. It came out around Halloween, and it's called Half-Minute Horrors. And they asked me to contribute to it, and so I did. And I wrote a horror story that you can read in approximately 20 seconds. These are all half-page, one-page horror stories by American authors, both adults and kids authors. So if you want to see my horror story, and it's called The Chicken and the Egg, or The Chicken or the Egg, I forget what I call it. You can get half-minute horrors. Okay, I'm told that's what we have time for at the moment, gang, right? So what are we going to do now?
And what we're going to do is we're going to put you back here. I'm going to ask kids by grade to line up.
I think it was very inspiring just to hear what he had to say about what made him write certain books and how he came to be a writer.
The places I like to go, the stuff like how he grew up in Norriton, that was really interesting. Like how he liked to go to where the YMCA used to be, that was really, I really liked that.
My favorite book's Maniac Movie because I think it's very fascinating and it's kind of mysterious because when you read it once, you want to keep on reading it and reading it over again.